Hi everyone, this is Jim. This video is a postmortem of an over-the-board game I played this week. This is played at my local club with the time control of game in 2 hours and a 5-second delay. So nice, relaxed time control. Although it is played late at night, the rounds start around 7:45 and go on till midnight in some cases. Anyway, I'm mentioning that because it does actually play a factor in the game, I think. I start off with d4. My opponent played knight f6. I go c4, goes e6, and we get into opening, which is very familiar, the Nimzo-Indian defense, and I play my usual response of e3, which is the Rubinstein variation. And he goes with c5 here. It's an interesting way to play, and a move that I like to play myself, although sometimes I will castle as well. Let's say I continue developing with knight f3, and he goes d5. So this is an interesting way to play. I think it was one of the old main lines, not exactly this position, but one of the old main lines was to put up all the pawns here with black in response to this setup. And it leads to isolated queen's pawn position for one side or the other, depending on how things go. Typically, but it's a little bit early to play d5. Black hasn't castled, so we're in a bit of a rare position from the point of view of the opening book, although we get back into a more normal position after a few moves. I play bishop d3, he castles here, and now we're in a very mainstream position that's been played a lot. And so that little change in move order didn't matter a whole lot. Now it's black's turn. And the normal capture here, actually there's two moves. One is just developing the knight to c6, continuing to play with adding pressure to the center, or the second choice is d takes c4, gaining a tempo on this bishop and forcing, well, the bishop may end up somewhat displaced on c4. We see that actually happening later in the game. But he played the third choice here. He took on d4. It's kind of a logical choice in a way. It's one of the ideas of the of a move like this is to exchange the c-pawn for a center pawn. And at the same time, it opens up this retreat diagonal for the bishop. So I think we have an interesting position here. And now he takes in this direction. So he's saddled white with the isolated queen's pawn. And then right here, the normal follow-up is b6. Just preparing to finish white's development, get the bishop onto this nice diagonal. And there's a position where white has the isolated queen's pawn, but he also has all his pieces still on the board and pretty actively placed. So it's an interesting position for both sides to play. If black wants to reduce the material so that white doesn't have all the pieces on, he can always take this knight off, but that will white will typically recapture with the pawn, and that will help strengthen the isolated pawn. It won't be isolated anymore, and white will have the bishop pair. So pros and cons there. Anyway, my opponent played an interesting move here. He played queen c7, and not a bad move. It immediately asks a question. What am I going to do about the c-file here? I have a bishop that's loose, and if I move the bishop out of the way, he can take on c3 and just win a pawn there. So I plugged this position into the chess engine to see what was the right move here, because the move I play here is a bit of a mistake. So you might want to, if you want to take the opportunity to think about different moves here, this might be an interesting position to look at. It's kind of the first position in the game where neither side is really in the opening book anymore, and we're both trying to figure out what's going on our own. So it's always a good time to pause and try and figure things out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about it. My first instinct was to retreat the bishop to b3 because I have ideas like bringing the bishop around like this and bringing my queen up here and threatening the king side. I have to also chase this knight away, but I can develop the bishop to g5. So that's one attacking idea in this position that I often play for. And I almost made that move before realizing that like I said, he can take here and win a pawn. So the funny thing is that bishop to b3, this move that I was afraid of playing, is one of the engine choices in this position, one of the playable moves it considers. He takes, I take, queen takes, and then not chasing the queen right away, but just going with bishop to g5 and threatening maybe to take here and mess up the pawns. Knight to d5, rook to c1, chasing the queen away. Queen goes to b4, and we can kind of pause here. And white is down a pawn. White has sacrificed a pawn. But white has all of his pieces out, including a rook developed. All of his minor pieces are out. One of his rooks is already developed, and the queen is in a position to jump in pretty quickly to the game as well. The knight has been chased away from the king side in a way, and there's two pieces that are undeveloped on the back rank. So the chess engine overall considers this more than enough compensation for the pawn. When I was in this position, well, let's back up one move and think about the bishop b3 move. After I noticed, well, first I was just going to play it, and then I reminded myself to pause and think, and noticed that this pawn was hanging. And I did consider for a while, that pawn sacrifice, thinking that maybe bishop to d2, chasing the queen back, would be a way to gain a tempo, and it might be worthwhile. But I really didn't see anything concrete coming out of it. Didn't see that particular line the computer pointed out. And even, if you look at the end of that line with the chess engine, it looks good on the surface, but I don't know, how confident are you in a slow game that you're going to be able to take advantage of this advantage in space here and development and really convert this to a win? And of course, if you don't convert it to a win, then your opponent has a good endgame with the extra pawn. So, and you still have this weak, isolated queen's pawn, which has been blockaded. So there are some liabilities in white's position. So even if I had calculated this line, I don't know if I would have gone for it, that bishop b3 line. A move I did consider is queen d3, and that's one of the chess engine recommendations. But I wasn't entirely happy with it because I thought he could continue to pile up pressure on the c file. But I think this is an example where I wasn't thinking concretely enough. You have to imagine the move like queen d3. What sequence of moves does white have to really put more pressure on the c file? He's got to move his bishop out of the way. He's got to bring his rook over. And in the meantime, I have moves that I can play to strengthen my position. In fact, when he develops the bishop, I could immediately drop my bishop back to b3 or play my bishop out to d2 to support the knight. And either of those seem to fit okay with the position, and so I don't have to avoid this move. The weakness on the c file is not all that great. I guess the other thing I was worried about is the queen on d3 might be subject to pins with the rook to d1. So like I said, these are kind of vague concerns, but they dissuaded me from playing this move, which is probably the best move, and instead I played the move queen to b3. So this is how the game went. It meets the demands of the threat, but it doesn't really meet the demands of the position. The queen and bishop battery on this diagonal is just not really going to amount to a whole lot. There is maybe some vague possibility of pushing forward with d5 and trying to get something going on this diagonal, but it never actually materializes in the game because now black's counterplay comes pretty quickly. He starts by taking off the knight. Oh, so just from the engine perspective, by the time I play this move, queen b3, I've given up the advantage, and this position is about even. So black is equalized at this point. And we'll see how he plays. This is nice. So he takes here, and then he develops his knight to c6. And now you can see the problem with this alignment of pieces. He's got this knight to a4 move, which can chase those pieces off the diagonal. And so they're just not stable here, so I never have time to really organize any play against the e6 pawn. So it may have looked impressive at the moment when I played those two pieces out, but black has a good counter. Okay, so I continue developing. No, I'm sorry. I moved my bishop away from the threat of knight to a5 there, because I don't want to give up that bishop for the knight. The one thing I do have going for me in this position is I have the bishop pair. And what black has going for him is he has better, or he has some active development ideas. And he finds another one right here. He pushes on with e5. And my next move is actually due to a mistake in calculation. I could just play rook e1 and maybe keep some slight edge here. But I was thinking I could take that pawn, and when he takes back with the knight, he can't take with the queen, obviously, because the pawn is hitting it, that I could pin the knight. And for some reason, I overlooked the fact that the knight could take, or could just come to f3 with check. So, the sequence I was thinking of was knight takes, bishop to f4. And in that position, it's not too hard to see that he has knight f3, sacrificing the knight but winning the bishop. My bishop is loose on f4. So that doesn't really work at all. It would mess up my pawns, and he would win back the bishop pair. I would no longer have the bishop pair advantage after that. So that would not be particularly good. So anyway, this move was just a mistake in calculation, although not a technical mistake, because the position stays in the range of about even. I realize here my mistake that I don't want to allow him to play knight to f3 and mess up my pawns over here on the king side. So I just take back, and now this is a position that resulted. And so we can talk about the themes of this position. Looks like black's a little more active than white. So black has kind of turned the tables, and white has some weak pawns. Notice also that this queen here is actually pinning the c-pawn at the moment because my rook is loose in the corner. So this pawn can't move at the moment, and it is my turn to move. So this would be a good point to try and formulate a plan. This is the advantages that white has are that white has the bishop pair, which is kind of a long-term advantage, and the bishops and the rooks like open lines. And even though white has kind of a disrupted pawn structure, the pawns over on the king side are very secure, so the king is safe, and so these pawns are weak, but they also provide open lines for the pieces. So those are the countervailing advantages. So you might want to pause the video here again if you want to just kind of think about it. I think I found a decent move here. There's no big tactic here. It's just a question of looking at the position, looking at the strengths and weaknesses, and trying to come up with a plan for white. Okay, the move I decided on was queen b4. And this puts the queen on a dark square away from the color of this bishop, and it supports the move bishop to f4. That was really the primary motivation. In this position, I was thinking of a couple other ideas. I was thinking, well, what about g3 here, so I could play bishop f4 and gain a tempo on the queen and get a good outpost for the bishop. But that creates these light squared weaknesses. He can come in with his light squared bishop on those light squares. So I kind of ruled that out pretty quickly. Then I was just casting about for other ideas. And queen b4, I think, turned out to be a pretty good move. It is one of the choices on the engine list of decent moves. There's, of course, lots of other moves here, so if you found some other plan, there's not necessarily anything wrong with it. I'm just sharing my thoughts on what I came up with. So my opponent played b6 here. I think this is a good move. It opens up a line for his bishop, and he doesn't have to keep protecting this pawn forever. I have pressure on that b pawn, so now it's pretty solid. And I get in my move bishop f4. So finally I've gotten all my minor pieces off the back rank. And he plays his queen over here to h5. I mean, I also have ideas of maybe taking off this knight and bringing my queen over and threatening on h7, or dropping the bishop back and bringing my queen in front. So there's still these attacking ideas on the king side. So bringing the queen over here is both a defensive move as well as an offensive move. He's got ideas of bringing his knight into the g5 square and making threats against my king as well. So good move here. I played b5 bishop to g3 in this position. So this is another move I need to criticize, I guess. But it's not it's not a bad move. I was just worried about this move, knight to d5, forking the queen and the bishop, and it doesn't win material because I can defend the bishop, but it does remove my bishop pair advantage. So I was moving my bishop out in advance of that. But there's another really clever way here that the chess engine finds to deal with that threat of knight to d5. And the chess engine's top choice here is rook f to e1. And what this does is it sets a really nasty trap. So this is a tactical moment in the game. The thing is, this actually absolutely prevents him from playing knight to d5, and at the same time it develops a piece. So it's kind of the ideal move in a kind of a textbook sense. You're making a move that develops a piece, which is what you want to do anyway, and you also are dealing with your opponent's threats by having a bigger counter threat. So the question for you guys is, can you figure out the tactic? So suppose I play rook f to e1 and he plays knight to d5, which is the move I was worried about. What tactic does white have in that position which is just winning? Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. Of course, I didn't play this way in the game. I didn't see this at all. This was discovered by the chess engine. So if I play rook f e1, and he plays knight to d5 here, I have the amazing queen sacrifice. Queen takes f8. He takes, and then the bishop check. And of course, if the king moves back, then there's just mate on the back rank. But otherwise, he has to start giving back material with throwing his knight away. And this is just a winning position for white. White has a winning attack here. So kind of an amazing tactic out of the blue. I wasn't seeing that. The weakness here, if you want to try and understand where these tactics arise from, the real weakness here in this position is that black hasn't developed his light squared bishop, so he's got a back rank weakness, and that's what I'm exploiting with this tactic. So pretty amazing. Anyway, I played bishop to g3 here, and the game continued. And that's not a bad move, but if you don't play the best moves in a position, then your advantage will slowly decline if you have one, or your opponent may get the upper hand even. He develops his bishop on the back rank, so there's no more tricks. And now I play a good move in this position. I come up with a plan and start to implement it. I don't follow through correctly, just to let you know, to foreshadow a little bit. But I start off with a good plan. So if you want to pause the video here again, see if you can find a little plan for white. Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. I didn't see any great continuation in terms of piece play. And I started thinking about my pawn weaknesses. And one idea when you have weak pawns is to dissolve them and maybe even create weaknesses on your opponent's pawn structure. And so I played the move a4 with the intention of playing a5. And now if I get in the move a5, if he takes, I can take back with the rook. I've activated my rook, and I've got a situation where we both have passed but isolated pawns. So sort of compensating weaknesses. I don't have the weaker pawn structure anymore, and I still have the two bishops advantage. So that would be good. And if he advances the pawn, then I can just take it. So that was a decent plan. He played rook f to c8, trying to get a little bit of counter pressure on my c pawn here. And I retreated here with queen to b2. So I didn't follow through with my plan. But checking this out with the chess engine, the engine likes the idea of just continuing. The thing is, this gives the pawn back, doesn't it? What I saw was, I cancel it. After a5, I thought he was going to play this knight d5 move again. I hadn't really dealt with that knight d5 idea. And but the chess engine says I should just drop my queen back to b2 and just play on from this position I am threatening still to win this pawn. And if he takes this pawn, I can trade and win a pawn here. I guess that's what I mean to say. And if he does nothing, I'm going to trade out that pawn and win there anyway. And if he takes, I'm going to take back with the rook and pin his knight. And if he pushes forward, I'm going to take with the bishop. So I could have just gone ahead with that a5 move. I just could have followed through with my original plan. I planned a4, a5, and then at this point I started to worry about that knight d5. It was combined with this rook fc8 move. Now he's got enough pressure to win this pawn, and I didn't calculate through the consequences, but that turns out to be good for white. Let him have that pawn and win both of these. And again, it's the same kind of deal. I've dissolved my weaknesses, and I've got the bishop pair advantage still. So instead of that, I dropped my queen back to b2 in advance of his bringing the knight here. So I'm just getting out of the way of the knight. And now he plays a good move, rook to c5. So black is still doing pretty well in this position. The valuations as we go along, I haven't been giving every little up and down, but it's been ranging between a slight edge to white or just completely even for black. So that's kind of the nature of the evaluation in these positions so far. Let's see, he developed his rook. That prevents my a5 idea. I played bishop to e2, hitting his queen, and this is a bit of an oversight, actually. I really didn't see this move, bishop to g4. He just interposes his bishop, so I don't know if this bishop e2 move accomplished a whole lot. But in this position, I started thinking, I don't want to trade bishops. I don't want to just go back. And I played the move f3, and I think this actually turned out to be pretty good. Just to say, what I was thinking here was he would either move the queen or maybe bring his knight in here, and then I could kick it with h3. Actually, that would just lose a piece. So I thought I was chasing the queen around. I don't know why I overlooked this bishop g4 move, but I just completely missed it. Then I had to improvise at this point, and but I think f3 is actually a good move. It appears to weaken the king side, right? It opens up this diagonal, but I can, but it's with the tempo. I play f3 with the tempo. It hits the bishop, and it gives me time to drop my bishop back to f2 to defend that diagonal, and that's also an active square for the bishop. So he dropped his bishop back to e6. I think slightly better would be to put the bishop on d7 and continue to look at the a pawn. One of my ideas in pushing that a pawn forward in the first place was his bishop was staring at it on a2, and I wanted to kind of liberate my pieces by not having to defend them. So that was the other motivation for pushing the a pawn forward. Anyway, he goes back to e6, and I play bishop f2, kicking his rook. And now right here, I start to get a slight advantage again. The chess engine recommends bringing the rook over here to g5 and then lining up, well, I'll show you, rook g5, bishop to d4, and then queen to g6, piling up on the the g2 square, and then rook to f2 to defend. This is the line given by the chess engine, with about equality. So that's an interesting way to play. He's getting a lot of pressure here on the king side, but it appears he has no immediate breakthrough. Notice that this f3 pawn also is controlling squares where his knight might hop in. His knight could still come in via via h5 here to g3. That's another plan for the knight, but he can't immediately hop into these squares. So it seems to be a pretty solid defensive setup for white. And so I'm still doing okay, but black has some initiative here, and this position is about equal. So that would have been the best way for black to play. At this point, I think he started getting a little bit tired. Like I said, this was a it's a long game starting late at night, and sometimes you're not up for all the calculations involved in playing a move like rook to g5. That's certainly a move that requires a lot of calculation because it's a lot of opportunities for black to harass for white to harass the rook there and chase it around and maybe even trap it. So he played the understandable move rook c to c8, but I start to get a little bit of an initiative here. I bring my rook out to d1, and I have ideas of bringing it up to the dark squares. What I was noticing in this position in terms of kind of the strategic considerations, is I have this dark squared bishop and he doesn't, and there are certain dark squares on the board where I can control them pretty well, and rook up and over like that. He's not well set up to prevent these kind of ideas. So I think this kind of dark square play is starting to turn the game in my favor a little bit. He plays with knight d5, going after my c-pawn again, and I play a move here which I didn't quite calculate correctly. So this turned out okay for me, but partly by mistake. So the move I was thinking of playing here was f4, and of course I'd left my pieces here set up like this, so I might have this possibility. This move comes with the tempo, and it also opens up this this long diagonal for my bishop. But it's also a weakening move, so it is a move you have to calculate carefully before playing, because that's just a loose pawn there that he can scoop up. So anyway, if you want to have a little calculation exercise, you could think about this move f4 and ask yourself what is Black's best response to that move. Okay, so I played the move f4, and let's first show Black's best response, and I'll also show you what I miscalculated. He could play queen f5 here, blocking that pawn and still defending the knight. It's important to remember this knight is a bit loose here. It's only defended, if the queen moves away, it's only defended by the bishop, and I have already a rook on it, and I'm going to place another bishop here on f3. So this was my plan, just to increase the pressure here. What I didn't really quite appreciate was that he can actually take on c3 here, because when he takes on c3, he's attacking my rook and I'm attacking his rook. And so this this kind of gives that knight an escape. I was thinking the knight was pinned there, so I miscalculated that. It was in, we talk about it, it was in this position where I'm trying to calculate f4. I had to see that sequence f4. I actually thought queen f5 was the most likely move, and I was planning bishop f3, and in that position I didn't notice that knight takes c3 hits my rook. So that was my calculation mistake. Anyway, if we go forward to that position again, queen f5, bishop f3, knight takes c3. The engine says rook e1, and now if the knight goes back to d5, then rook e5 hits the queen and hits the rook, and actually drives the queen away and wins a piece. So after rook e1, he plays bishop to d5 to block the diagonal, and then rook e5 again, queen d3. Remember I'm a pawn down here, so I have to have some activity to compensate for it. But this turns out to be okay for me. Rook e3, queen goes over to c4 to hold on to all the material, and then we can trade out. This is the engine line given here. It recommends just trading everything out. Queen takes, rook takes, bishop takes, and what I've got at the end of all this, and then rook a to c8 to save his rook. What I've got at the end of all this is I have two bishops versus a rook and a pawn. So I've lost a pawn, but I've gained two bishops versus a rook. And it's an endgame with a slight edge to white. So I could play on, that would be best play in this position after I played this move f4. I went f4, and so that's queen f5, and best play leaves me with a slightly better endgame. So that would be how the game might have continued. Anyway, as I mentioned in the earlier move, he was a little bit tired at this point, didn't see all the threats, and just dropped his queen back to h6. And now this really is winning for white. It's finally become winning. There's a simple win here, so if you want to put on your tactics hat and find the best move for white here, which actually I didn't play, you can see if you can find the best move for white here. Okay, I'm going to give that answer away. The best move for white is a very simple move, pawn to f5, hitting the bishop and just distracting it away from defense of the knight. The knight is loose. The only piece defending it is the bishop, and so that just wins a piece outright. I played, because I had already, as I mentioned before, been thinking about this diagonal. I continued with my plan of playing here, and this is also winning. It's just not the cleanest win and not the most accurate move here. And now he tries knight takes c3. And this by this time I'd actually spotted this knight takes c3 idea. I played bishop f3, and after I played that I was saying, oh, what if he plays knight takes c3? That was when I realized it. But I had already worked out an answer, and there's a pretty good answer after knight takes c3. So if you want to guess or figure out what I played in this position. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away. I played rook to d3. You want to move this rook because it's under attack, and you want to move it with tempo so that you still have this threat on the rook. But there's actually an even more important idea here, which is this knight is trapped. It has no squares to go to. If you look at every square, I have control of those squares. So everywhere it goes, he's just losing a piece. So I end up winning that piece anyway. Kind of amazing that in the middle of a fairly open board I managed to control all those squares, but it's just the way it happens. And the only piece that can defend the knight is the queen. Let's erase all of these arrows here. And the queen can only defend from the f6 square, and if he plays queen f6, I have bishop to d4 defending, hitting the queen and attacking the knight, so that doesn't work. But it shows why rook d3 is a better move. Well, actually, the chess engine says rook to c1 is also winning, but rook to d3 I think is the simplest win. So he tried knight d5 here, which is okay. He's going to win a pawn for the piece. Let's see. I take, he takes, I take, and then he grabs here on f4. I mean, he could have tried grabbing the a pawn with his knight is another way of playing it, but it would have worked out about the same. And anyway, after this exchange, I just played queen d2. Not necessarily the best move here, but I'm just willing to go into an endgame with a piece versus two pawns. And at this point, he decided to resign. I think he didn't see much future in this position. This also has the idea of tripling on the c file, but the engine says that white or black could try to play on with this exchange and just go into this endgame with two pawns versus a bishop. The drawing idea for black here would be to trade off all the pawns and one pair of rooks and just go with a rook versus rook and bishop. And that is a theoretical draw, but it's not going to be so easy for black to trade off all those pawns. This bishop is going to be pretty active. So I think I have good winning chances in this endgame. Probably a win for white. But that would have been black's best chance. Anyway, we got to this position after queen d2. My opponent decided to resign. So anyway, that's my first victory of the new year. Thought I would share that with you. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.